Good morning, class. Today we will discuss about another type of anti-parasitic agent, or you can rather say it is an anti-protozoal agent also. But precisely these are used against an infection called malaria. So we are calling it as anti-malarial agents. I hope this is not a new word to you, and you must have learned about this in other subjects also. But we are going to learn about the aspects related to chemistry in this particular topic called anti-malarial agents. So let me share my screen. I'll move to the next slide, where we are going to learn first about what are the causative organisms and what are the different types of malaria. And when we learn about the life cycle of the malarial parasite, then it would be easy for us to understand what types of drugs are acting against the malarial parasite. So we will first learn what are the causative organisms and what is its life cycle. As you can see on the screen, you can define anti-malarial agents as the drugs that are used for the treatment and prevention of malarial infection. And you must be knowing how this term called malaria was coined. It is coined from two terms, mal and air. Mal or area. Mal refers to bad, and the other part of your word refers to air. It was first thought that malaria was spreading in people because of a bad air or a foul air. So it was termed as malaria, but later on it was then confirmed or then understood that the causative organism of malaria is plasmodium, but not air. So the infection is not spreading through air, but it is rather spreading through the bite of infected female Anopheles mosquito. And this is acting as a carrier. The Anopheles mosquito is acting as a carrier, and that is why it is referred to as a vector. So female Anopheles mosquitoes can be called as malarial vectors. And do always remember that only female mosquitoes feed on humans, and generally male mosquitoes will be feeding on plant juices. They'll be generally on plants. They'll be living on the juices, or they'll be depending on the juices in plants. Only the female mosquitoes will be attacking other organisms, and that is why here the causative organism, the carrier of malaria is the female Anopheles mosquito, and it carries Plasmodium parasites. You must have heard of this term called Plasmodium parasite. It belongs to the category of protozoa, and that is why you can call this class of agents as anti-protozoal agents also. You have this topic in your theory. It is named, you have a topic named anti-protozoal agents. So in that we will be coming across this topic called malaria again. But now we are studying this as a separate topic, and you can understand that now malaria is an infection basically which is spread by female Anopheles mosquito, and it is carrying plasmodium parasites, and it is transmitting it from one person to another person, acting as a effective vector or an effective carrier. And there are about 200 species of plasmodium parasites. You must have heard of the names of only 4 or 5, because these are more commonly the ones which are infecting humans. But apart from that, on the whole, there are around 200 species of plasmodium parasites which are known to mankind. Now, of the 200 parasites, there are almost 5 of them which are most commonly seen. Of the 5, there are 4 which are commonly, attacking humans or infecting humans. So those are mentioned here, that is Plasmodium vivax, Plasmodium ovale, Plasmodium malariae, and Plasmodium falciparum. And of these 4, you have Plasmodium vivax and Plasmodium falciparum to be the most severe forms. The other 2 are the mild forms, that is ovale and malariae are the mildest forms, but vivax and falciparum are the most severe forms of malaria. I mean, they cause the most severe forms of malaria, and that may sometimes lead to death also. And I have given the incubation period here, which is mentioned as liver cycle. We will discuss about that in detail in our next slides. But just understand that incubation period is where in that particular period of time it is remaining active, it is remaining in a completely developing stage, and it is ready to produce a infection. So for falciparum it is around 7 to 14 days, and this happens in the liver of human. So this is the phase which is happening in human, and this is also called the asexual phase. You have two phases of malarial parasite, sexual phase and the asexual phase. So this is pertaining to the asexual phase, and this happens in the liver. And for Plasmodium vivax, it is around 12 to 17 days, and this has a relapse period. Relapse is where it remains dormant within the body. It is not eliminated out of the body. It remains dormant in the body, and it is capable of producing an infection again after activation, and that is for about 3 years. So now if Plasmodium vivax, we will come across the different forms of the parasite which can remain in your body. So that form, if it is remaining in an uneliminated form, if it is not being eliminated out of your body, if it is remaining in your body, it is capable of producing an infection even after 3 years. Up to 3 years, it is still capable of producing an malarial infection in a human. And for oval, the incubation period is about 9 to 18 days, and this has a greatest relapse period of about 20 years. It is still capable of producing an infection for about 20 years. Then we have Plasmodium malariae, and this Plasmodium malariae is capable of producing an infection for about 13 to 40 days. That means more than a month. Its incubation period is more than a month. I hope this is clear about Plasmodium and its incubation period. So we have malaria spreading through the bite of female Anopheles mosquito, and it carries the Plasmodium parasite. And when it is biting one person, it releases the parasite into that particular person, and he will be developing an infection. And that is how malaria is being transmitted. It is not through air, but it is through mosquitoes, which are called the vectors or the carriers. And the Plasmodium, which is capable of, or which is actually producing the infection, is of 4 or 5 different, the fifth type is Knowlesi. We have 5 common types of malarial parasites which can infect humans, though there are about more than 200 parasites known to mankind. Am I clear up till here? I will proceed with the next part. That is the modes of transmission. Now we have seen it is the vector, that is Anopheles mosquito, is carrying it from one person to the other person. That means malaria is being transmitted by blood. So if the Plasmodium parasite is in the blood, it can be transmitted to any other person to which this infected blood is going. The malarial parasite is remaining in your body, and this will be transmitted only through blood. So if another Anopheles mosquito, or if the infected person is being bitten by another mosquito, that mosquito will take up this parasite. Because it is biting the human, it will take up the blood, it is sucking up the blood. So when it is taking the infected blood, it is carrying the parasite within itself, and when it bites another person, it is being transmitted to the other person. But now, even though when the parasite, even though when the mosquito is not biting the human, if the infected person's blood is transferred to another person, still the infection can be carried on, or it can be transmitted. And that is by an organ transplant. That is, if the infected blood, that is the blood of a person who is infected with malaria, is being transplanted, if any of the organ of that particular person is being transplanted, then there is every chance that through the infected blood, the Plasmodium parasite may reach the other person, and may cause an infection in that particular person. Or it may be even through transfusion, when there is a requirement of blood in an emergency situation, or when there is a surgery, there is generally transfusion of blood from one person to the other person, that is from the donor to the acceptor. So in that case, if the donor is not being screened properly, and if he is already carrying an infection, that is, now he may not be suffering with malaria, but in the previous slide we have seen that there is a relapse period where the organism, the plasmodium parasite, can remain in the blood for about 20 years also we have seen, for 3 years we have seen. So within that period, if the blood of the donor is not being screened properly, then there is every chance that this infective organism or the plasmodium parasite can be transmitted to the other person who is receiving the blood. Similarly, there is chance of transmission of malaria by the use of shared needles or syringes. For some reason, when somebody is taking a medication through an IV route, when the needles or syringes are being shared, then it may not be knowingly but unknowingly, because if a person is in a relapse period, we don't know that he is suffering from malaria, because there are no symptoms at the outside. There are no symptoms seen in the person when he is in a relapse period. So unknowingly also there may be transmission of malaria from one person to the other person. And there is another case, and this is specifically named as congenital malaria. This congenital malaria is malaria, congenital is something which is there by birth. So here what happens is, if an infected mother delivers a baby, then the malarial parasite can also pass on to the newborn baby, or an infected mother can pass the disease to her baby at birth. That means the newborn baby by birth receives the malarial parasite, and such a condition is called congenital malaria. Am I clear up till here? So the various modes of transmission, or you can say the primary mode of transmission, is only by blood, but it may not be carried only by the Anopheles mosquito. It can be directly transmitted from one person to the other person through the transmission of an infected blood, and that can be by organ transplant, transfusion, or use of shared needles and syringes, and also by a congenital route. That is, when an infected mother is delivering a baby, it can pass on from her to her baby. Is that clear? Then I'll move to the next part, which is types of malaria. This classification of malaria is only based on the severity of the disease. The Anopheles mosquito is carrying the plasmodium parasite from one person to the other person. It is infecting a new person every time it bites. So, and depending on the severity of the disease, and depending on the time taken for the symptoms to be shown, for the symptoms to come up in a person, depending on that time and depending on the severity, we are categorizing malaria into 4 prominent types. That is benign tertian malaria. Tertian stands for 3. That is, every 3 days you can see chills and the other symptoms, that like fever. It is actually called a febrile illness. That is because you always observe an elevated body temperature in people who are suffering from malaria. So this is called a febrile infection or a febrile illness. So every 3 days, if the symptoms come up, that is every 3 days, when we you will be clearly understanding it when we go through the life cycle of plasmodium. But for now, just understand that tertian stands for 3, and here we have a quartan type. Quartan stands for 4. So for every 3 days you have the symptoms of malaria coming up, and for every 4 days there are symptoms coming up, because there is release of the infective form of malaria every 3 days into the RBC, or every 4 days into the blood. Into 3 days, after every 3 days, if the infective forms are released out due to the rupture of RBC, it will be producing some symptoms, and here it happens every 4 days. So that is the meaning of the term tertian and quartan. And benign malignant and mild. You must be knowing this. Malignant is a more severe form, mild is a little less, benign is less severe form than the other one. And benign tertian malaria is caused by Plasmodium vivax. Malignant tertian is caused by falciparum. Then you have mild tertian, which is caused by ovale, and we have the quartan malaria, which is produced by malariae. These are the four common forms, and apart from that, we have something called as knowlesi, in KNOWLESI. This is another type of Plasmodium knowlesi. So these are few other a little more information about the types of malaria, which is based on the severity of the disease. Then these are few symptoms of malaria. It is seen that malaria is capable of altering most of your physiological processes, and I have already explained to you that it is a febrile illness, and if a person is non-immune, the symptoms usually appear after 10 to 15 days after the mosquito bite, and within 10 to 15 days it is actually entering your body, and there it has to go through an asexual life cycle, a sexual part of its life cycle. Then it will be releasing out, or it will be releasing out the infective forms into the blood, and that is when actually the symptoms appear. So that will take around 10 to 15 days, or it cannot be not exactly 10, it can be before that also, depending on an individual. And centrally it is known to produce headaches, and the common symptoms that you generally observe will be high fever, and we observe profuse sweating and chills. These are the common ones that you observe. And apart from that, there may be spleen enlargement, there may be nausea, vomiting and abdominal pain, there may be bloody stools, and there may be fatigue and aches, muscle ache, there may be dry cough also. All these are the other symptoms associated with malaria, but commonly the three things that we quote when we take the name of malaria would be high fever, profuse sweating and chills. These are what we commonly observe for malaria. And these symptoms, that is chills, sweating and fever, is what you observe when there is a rupture of our RBC and release of the infective forms into the blood. So in few type, if the causative organism is one type, that is like for ovale or for vivax or for malaria, it is of it takes different amounts of time. For some it takes 3 days, every 3 days, so that is called a tertian type. For some it takes 4 days, so it is called a quartan type of malaria. That is how we have categorized it in our previous slide. I hope this is clear about the symptoms. Then this is an overview, or this is what we have known about malaria up till now. If you have not learnt about it in detail in any other subject, then this is what you must have. This is the idea that you have about malaria. You think that there is an infected mosquito, and that bites a person, and the person becomes infected. That is, the liver of that particular person is being infected. Then it goes on to infect our red blood cells, and that means the infection is transmitted into the blood. And when another mosquito bites us, through when it is sucking up our blood, through the blood the parasite is reaching the mosquito and it is being carried to another person. This is what we know. But the different forms, or the different infective forms of the parasite which are remaining in the mosquito and remaining in a human host are is what you'll have to understand actually the mechanism of action of different types of drug molecules. So we will be learning about that in detail in this topic called anti-malarial agents. Okay, am I clear?